So now that I've convinced you how important brand alignment for your podcast is, I now have 3 tips to make that a little easier for you. Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. All week long I've been talking about the importance of branding and your podcast and what your podcast says about your brand. Today I'm going to bring it all home. And in a moment, I'm going to give you 3 tips on how you specifically, can keep your business-focused podcast on brand. That's coming up in just a moment. But before I do that, just a quick little recap about how important your brand is out there. And I thought about it in a couple of ways. As I was getting ready to do the show this morning, it came to the forefront of my brain about how much effort businesses, organizations, nonprofits, even professional service providers, how much effort they put into their brand all the time, and how that all too often they don't do the same thing with the podcast. So just think for a minute, what would happen if you sent your biz dev person out on the road? You know, biz dev, to drum up new business. That's the idea behind a biz dev person. You might say sales manager. If you put this person out on the road with a crappy PowerPoint presentation that had your logo of your business all pixelated because it was originally taken from a thumbnail and then expanded out to make it work in a PowerPoint. Crappy font usage, lots of Comic Sans, weird color schemes, pictures that have been resized so that bodies are stretched to the top or wide out there. Poor transitions or just way too many transitions. You'd freak out. You'd fire that business development person and go hire someone else who was a little more concerned about the quality of the product that they were representing your brand with. Same thing goes for the people who are managing your relationships with your clients. You know, if they showed up in ratty jeans and a crappy t-shirt to a board meeting for a Fortune 500 company, you'd have issues with that. That would not be what you would want to do. Well, that's what your podcast is doing every single day. Your podcast is representing your brand, either to your customers, to your clients, to your prospects, maybe to your competitors, maybe to the public at large, and they're making generalizations about your brand. They are. I promise you that they're doing that. So you know that. That's why you're listening. You want more information. Okay, Evo, I get it. I know that my brand is important. So how do I make sure to keep my brand of my podcast on point with the brand of my company, yet still make a podcast? I mean, I want to have fun with the podcast. My business wants to be out there and doing the new stuff. Do the 3 things align, the 2 things align. Absolutely they do. There is no reason you can't enter the podcasting space as a business and yet keep your brand on point. That's what the entire week's worth of shows have been about. So if this is your first entrance into this, back up. The prior 3 episodes, we'll talk more about that. But now it's time to give you the 3 tips. How to make sure that your podcast that is being produced, not necessarily on a weekly basis, but we talked about that yesterday. How do you make sure that your podcast, the episodes of your podcast, are on point with your brand? Well, 3 ways to do that. Number one, the same way you'd make sure that your biz development people, that your account management people, that anybody else representing your company to the real world, the same way you would check to see how they're doing, you can do with your podcast. We call that observing in the real world. As a business owner, you likely walk around and see what your people are doing. You likely attend some of the meetings that your biz dev person is having. And you're watching to make sure that they're accurately representing the brand you've worked so hard to build. You can do that with your podcast so much easier. How? Listen. Listen to your podcast. I am amazed at the number of business owners I have met just in the last 6 months, for big companies and small companies, that have a podcast. Someone in their organization is making a podcast for them, and they've never listened. Or they have listened, but that's the only podcast they've ever listened to, so they assume that they don't know they don't assume. They are not exposed to what good quality content sounds like. It's like they think that because it's a podcast, it must be lower quality than the things they can hear on the radio or an audiobook or in the television or anything else for that matter, which is simply not true. So tip number one, listen. Listen to your show, but also to listen to other shows. And if it's not the quality, the brand you are trying to represent, now you know. Now you know, simply because you observed and you listened. You should be your biggest fan, the biggest fan of your podcast. You should listen before anyone else. Listen to your show and others. Observe the content. The second thing that you can do, second tip I will give for you, is this takes time. To make a quality product sound the way you want it to sound so that it represents your brand properly, it takes time. So allow the people that are creating your podcast for you the time to do the job right. Look, it's not a 30-minute long process to put out a 30-minute long interview. That's not it. That's not enough time to do that. If it takes you 10 minutes to read a report, if it takes you 15 minutes to read a white paper that your company put out, you do recognize it didn't take 15 minutes for your company to assemble that, right? That 30-minute long PowerPoint presentation your biz dev person just gave to your biggest prospect in forever, it didn't take her 30 minutes to put that together. It took her a week or longer. It takes time to do that. You've got to understand, as the business owner, the person that's controlling the purse, that you need to be able to invest people's time as well as your money into making a good quality product that accurately represents your brand. Make time for that. And the third tip is, it's very possible that the people inside of your business cannot do this alone. So you might want to partner with someone for the future. Partner for now and for the future. Because this space moves fast. This podcasting space is moving crazy fast. And it's very difficult to keep up with it unless your full-time job is making podcasts. Just like it's very difficult to keep up with what's happening in digital media these days, or like it's very difficult to keep up with what's happening with web development, videos, or the sorts of media, all the things that you do that aren't core to your business, it's hard to keep up. So my third tip is partner with someone. Bring on a consultant. Doesn't have to be me. I mean, it can be me. Sure, I'd love to talk with you about that. But just bring on an expert whose job is to keep track of what's happening today and look forward the changes podcasting is going to go through, because it is under rapid change. That way your people stay focused on building the brand, making sure that the brand is represented in the content that's produced, but your partner, your consultant, the agency that you hire, their job is to make sure that that's accurately conveyed the best way possible in the medium as it exists today and possibly tomorrow. And if you do those things, and if you make sure you're making the right kind of content that accurately represents your brand, your customers will reward you. Now, as mentioned, if you would like to have a partner who's thinking about the future, who will help you understand the time investment you need to put into this and what you should be listening for to make sure you have a really good understanding of your podcast brand, get in touch with me. You can send me an email, evo@podcastlaunch.pro. You can go to podcastlaunch.pro to see a list of the services my firm is currently offering our clients all over the world. Hope you've enjoyed this little mini-series on branding. I shall be back, not tomorrow, but on Monday, with yet another Podcast Pontifications. Cheers!